Okay, everybody. Welcome to another TEMO talk show. This is our last time together. We're going to be focusing on strategy to organizational capabilities. And we have a guest here from Novo Nordisk. He is the corporate vice president. His name is Bort Grande. If I say his name correctly, I was wondering. Anyway, he is a former DTUian, if I can say it in that way. He has a PhD from DTU. He has been working as senior vice president now for, actually don't have all the details on.
6 years.
6 years. Now I'm completely out of my zone. It's a little bit early for me, so now I'm trying to get it. Remember we talked about bee mennesker, bee people? Yes, I'm feeling that now. So my notes are all a little bit combobulated, but we are actually very pleased. Let me see if I can pull it together here. That Bort is spending some time with us. He's going to tell us about some of the, he's going to give us a presentation as is the norm, and then he is going to sit down with me and talk about some of the special situations or some of the, in context of what happens with organizational change and strategies and possibilities and organizational culture in terms of Novo Nordisk. So, Bort, if you will please come on.
Sure.
We are pleased to have him do our presentation. And
thank you very much.
We'll get back to it.
Good. Thank you. Yes. Okay, I will do 10-15 minutes presentation. I head up an area in Novo Nordisk called Global Talent and Organizational Development, which covers a lot of stuff. We do leadership training. We have about 5,000 leaders in Novo Nordisk. We do onboarding new employees who just joined the company. We do learning management. We do reporting and HR analytics and a lot of other stuff. But what I will talk about today is organizational development and how we try to approach that in our company. Briefly about Novo Nordisk, just one slide about us. We claim we're the world leader in diabetes. Of course, in Western Europe and in Denmark, diabetes kind of is not a problem. Everybody who has diabetes is in treatment, is under control. In the world, it's an epidemic. There's about 300-400 million people with diabetes in the world. Half of them don't know that they have it and suffer from all kinds of complications, blindness, amputation, kidney failure, and so forth. So it's a huge, huge, huge problem. In the world, there's two types. Type 1 diabetes, which is kind of something you inherit from your parents, and type 2, which is a lifestyle because of overweight, poor diet, lack of exercise. And right now, I'm really sorry to say that 1 out of 3 Americans who are born today will get diabetes through his or her life. 1 out of 3. And it's a serious disease. Of course, as a business opportunity, that's what we call a growing market. So we have had 47 quarters, which is 12 years in a row, with more than 10% growth, top line and bottom line. There was something called the financial crisis some years ago. We didn't notice. We just went straight through with 10% growth because, of course, we are in this therapy area. We have right now 38,000 employees globally, about 16,000 in Denmark and 22,000 around the world. In every year, we hire between 5,000 and 6,000 new employees. Last year, we hired 6,500. So you can imagine when you're in HR, it's a huge machine to get these people hiring the right one, getting them onboarded, getting them into the organization in a good way. And we promoted approximately 700 new managers last year. So there's a lot of stuff we need to do in terms of making sure everybody understands our strategy, our values, our way of operating, and so forth. That's just to give the kind of context. In Danish terms, we're a huge company and we're growing really fast. What we call organizational changes, we have plus 100 every year. So there's a lot of this stuff we're talking about. We do on and on and on. For us, we make, I'll show a couple of slides, which is kind of things we want to highlight to our own managers in Novo Nordisk. To be very honest, things we think they get it wrong, and we need to stress some things. So first of all, we always say there's a big difference between organization design and organization development. Organization design is kind of concerned with making the structure right. The structure definition of what is the unit, team, department, and who is reporting to who. That's great. That's very important. Even more important, it's what we call organizational development, which we think covers organization design and all other activities which aim at improving the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the health of the organization. That could be things such as redesigning processes, changing key performance indicators, developing new competencies, management team development, and also organization design. It's a huge temptation for managers to kind of make new drawings, which we reorganize, and then we kind of think we have solved it. So we think, no, it's organizational development. It's making the organization work effectively. For us also, we say there's kind of 3 steps: diagnosis and root cause analysis. And the point here is to go below the symptoms of the needs and the dysfunction you observe to get to the root cause. So we have a problem, one part of the organization. There's tension, there's bad climate, people start to leave, there's high absence. What's the problem? Is it poor strategy? Poor communication of the strategy? Is the local manager a dictator? Are they just incompetent in general? Is the processes unclear? Should we restructure? We always say you need to spend a lot of time to find the root cause. Why is there a dysfunction in the organization? And in a company like ours, the temptation to just rush into solution mode is huge. So we always say spend a lot of time on finding out what are the root causes behind the symptoms. Then you do some kind of design, and this is very easy. Then the last point for us is implementation, and that's not a one thing off. Reinforcement. You have to repeat, come back. It's not done after the first design and adjustment. You will always learn something, that whatever solution we came up with wasn't perfect, and we need to make adjustments. So that's kind of the first and the third step in this is the most important for us to stress for our managers. They're diving right into solution design without having found the root cause and not thinking about the ongoing reinforcement and adjustment. These are some of the typical interventions, we call them, we do. And I have very deliberately put restructuring down here, something like number 7. The first thing we always look at is leadership development. Are we sure we have the right leadership in this team or unit which isn't functioning? Then there could be management team development, not just the individual head of the unit, but the team. If they don't work well together, it'll kind of cascade through the organization. So all kinds of interface problems is always a reflection of a dysfunctional management team. Then it's a third thing: strategy, review, clarification, communication. Communicate the strategy. We do that a lot. We can do something like the core business processes. Do they need to be reinforced? Targets and measurements. Are we rewarding people for the right thing? How big a thing is reward anyway? And in a big company like ours, if you're I'm going to stereotype. If you work in R&D, your annual bonus is great, but it's not the thing that keeps you alive or awake. It is because you want to develop great science. If you're in sales, your bonus matters. So there's kind of different things. How much can you direct behaviors with targets and bonuses and so forth? We can do something about the management processes, budgeting and so forth, restructuring, competency development, and sometimes around stakeholder management. Maybe we aren't actually doing anything wrong, but we're under-communicated with our stakeholders. So that's some of the things we try to do. 3 key learnings over the many years. I've been with the company for 10 years, so I've seen a lot of these things work and even more things don't work. First learning for me is this one. Anyone speak French here? Yeah? What does it say here? This is not a pipe. That's correct. What is it if it's not a pipe? It's a picture of a pipe. It's a huge difference between a pipe and a picture of a pipe. So when people do an organizational diagram with these boxes, they're making drawings. So people say, oh, we reorganized. I say, no, you made a new picture. It doesn't change much. So if you don't understand the difference between these fantastic managerial drawings and reality, you're in for surprises down the line. The second one, and this is maybe for our old colleagues, Karl Marx was right. Karl Marx wrote, men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, or transmitted from the past. And we have another way of saying it: the future has a long past. So it's very tempting to say, now we're going to sit down and redesign everything. In your dreams. That's not, we never do that. There's so many constraints. You know, you have the technology, you have the commitments, you have the promises, you have the employees, you have the competencies. So what I'm sometimes worrying about with this STAR model, it's a great descriptive model, but kind of for prescription, how you do things. It's kind of assuming this is year 0 and we can design everything from scratch. In our company, not at all. A lot of the different boxes are fixed. We can't touch them. We can touch them every 5th year. So you have to kind of, it's not a design from scratch, it's kind of a ongoing, continuous improvement. So we do something with the management team, but now we need to look at the rewards, and we need to look at the processes, but we can't do it all at the same time. So this is kind of a cycle. I'm sometimes feeling that this is a metaphor I think about when I do work with organizational development. I'm in the basement of this huge building, and there's just pipes and wires all over the place. And the original drawings have been lost a decade ago. And I'm going down there twisting, turning to make this machinery work better. At all times I'm sub-optimizing probably, but I'm doing what is possible given the context, the circumstances. So it's very important to stress that it's a great model to think about different factors, but you're always kind of right in the middle. You're thrown into the middle of it and have to deal with whatever circumstances you have, constraints in terms of competencies, in terms of time, in terms of money, commitments you've made, and so forth. So that's a key point for me. And this is another way of illustrating it. The model is kind of, how do you want the puzzle to look? Beautiful and in harmony and aligned. But basically the job is to make whatever pieces you have fit into some kind of puzzle. And that's the managerial job. And finally, we have the concept which we call the shadow of the leader. I went through some of our interventions pretty fast, but if you were a fast reader, you would see that we didn't mention culture. Organizational culture we don't mention, because it's a great descriptive category. It doesn't exist as a handle. So a lot of times you say, we need to change the culture. I say, great, show it to me. Which button would you push if you want to touch culture? It's nowhere. So we think culture is a lot of what we call the shadow of the leader. And I did a little research, my own research experiment to prove a point I was very sure about. So you can, of course, question my methodology when I was able to prove something I was decided up front was true. But we do internal management audit in Novo Nordisk, which means that there's a small group who travel around the company to see if every unit, every manager lives up to our own principles. That's a very simple version. And I did that for 2 years. So I went out to Canada, to the Philippines, to Thailand, to wherever we have an affiliate, and interview employees and managers about how is things working here, and coming up with kind of a diagnosis of the organization. I've been involved in leadership development in our company for many, many years, so I know many of these leaders. So when I would go to some kind of country, I would say, I know this manager. I'll make my own little simple non-scientific profile and see if that isn't kind of reflected in what we find in the organization. So here's an example. This is Vince Leader. He's a general manager of some country. This is what he knows. He has extremely deep business knowledge because he's been with the company for 20 years out there, worked in all kinds of positions, and he's an extremely passionate and energetic person. That's who he is. Sometimes we can all be what we call too much of a good thing. You're a little too much. You are who you are, but too much. So what we call the pitfalls is that he might be too involved in everything, in all details, because he knows everything. He interferes. He's controlling, pushing too hard, expecting too much, and maybe he's very unfocused and initiating things all the time. How will this show up in the organization? I don't know, but it will in some way. Maybe there's very centralistic decision-making. Everything has to go through him. Lack of empowerment, low trust because he's controlling too much. Is there stress because he's initiating all these things? Unclear strategy, lack of prioritization. So these are the hypotheses. In this case, all of the above was there. So for us, it's always, when you look at something, diagnosing an organization, look at who's in charge of it and how their personalities, how their competencies are kind of reflected in the culture. That's actually what I wanted to say. So I hope I didn't spend too much time on that. Okay, great.
Wonderful. Great. And on that note, Vince, the leader, we are going to challenge you a little bit during this conversation, I think, because we have some conflicting ideas about some of the models and the use of them, how it is applied in your organization. But first, you've been with Novo Nordisk for 10 years, as you've mentioned, and it's a 90-year-old organization. So you were there right at the cusp, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the start of the Novo Nordisk Way, what they promote as the Nordic Way. And how would that, that's a major change of such a large company. So we were talking, you were mentioning about you can't just push a button and get to culture.
No.
But over the 10 years, you have, at least on the website, established this organizational culture that breaks it down into 10 steps, and it breaks down the management and includes one of the things is the organizational audit, as you mentioned. So the question is, how is that, like, as you've seen it over the 10 years, how has it developed and how has it impacted Novo Nordisk's business?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, we had something called the Novo Nordisk Way of Management for many, many years, and we wanted to revise it to call it the Novo Nordisk Way, because it's not just for managers. So that's the process you're referring to. Luckily, we have a fantastic CEO. So he had been in office for 10 years, and he said, I wonder what's the real state of affairs in our company. So he traveled around, visited all around the company, because said, we need to kind of create a new Novo Nordisk Way. The other one is a little outdated. So he went around and talked to employees all over and based on that kind of process and a lot of other stakeholder input, we got the new Novo Nordisk Way. But how do we then enforce it? It's a huge launch campaign with communication and celebration in all kinds of part of the organization. We tie it into our leadership development programs, where we have more than 1,000 managers going to training every year. We have a management audit process where people are actually checking if we're living up to it. But you know, it's a very valid question, because now we actually launched the new version 3 years ago, and we're right now discussing, do we need to reinforce on a corporate scale something to make sure this is fully alive, not least given the strong growth we have. Every year we have 6,000 new employees who never heard about the Novo Nordisk Way. So how do we make sure that they kind of really get because this is a description of the culture, it's a 90-year history. So how do you get into that, especially if you're very far away from the mother home country?
Okay, so how do you deal with the difficulties of embedding that strategy across the boards in all the countries? And
yeah, but I think the best thing we do is these management audits. We basically have these 10 principles, and excuse my language, this is what they will call corporate bullshit, right? If we don't follow up. Every company has these kind of vision statements, and it's always a glossy brochure and a little film, and you see these employees, and you think, oh, I want to work for that company. We're just the same. So we need to say, do we actually live up to this? So we have these 10 management auditors who travel around the company. So they, first of all, they do a risk assessment every year, saying, where could this be under threat? It's under threat if we have new management team, if we have very poor business results, people will start to cut corners and so forth. If we are in a country with a high corruption index and so forth. So there's a lot of things we look into. If it's a high-risk country, they will get a visit from the auditors every year. The auditors will talk to employees, manager, give them a report, give them a grade for each 1 to 5 on each of these 10 points, and that report goes directly to the CEO. So there's a very tight follow-up if you're out of compliance with our values. And that has consequences.
Okay, so what emphasis do you put on motivation and rewards, and how do you work with these issues?
Short answer, a lot of emphasis. Motivation, we do employee climate survey every year. Every employee is anonymous, is asked, what do you think about all kinds of stuff? And of course, we analyze those data. I don't know, I'm a little proud of this because I own the system, is that we have a response rate of 97% out of 38,000. Most companies would kill for 60%. For some historical reason, we have an extreme response rate, so we have very good sense of that. When it comes to rewards, there's kind of two things to that. One of them is kind of what we call base salary. And of course, when you're a very financially successful company as we are, your ability to pay a decent salary is okay, right? So we have, you have these benchmarks. This is top pay for this kind of job across the industry, and we always want to be kind of at the higher end. Not don't want to be leader in paying much, but we want to be high. And then, of course, you work with what we call short-term incentive, which is annual bonuses and so forth. And you'll have very different opinions about whether those are the right one and generous. It's very hard to get to the conclusion, oh, my bonus last year was a little too big. I've never heard that, but it's probably possible.
Okay, and you were mentioning some of the challenges of using the STAR model in such a large organization. So I'm wondering, how can you actually use the STAR model? I mean, we talked about some of the difficulties, but are there aspects of it that you can actually utilize? And
yeah, first of all, I think the primary use of it is to help people think organizationally. Most managers in our company, I guess as in any company, have come in as specialists, as engineers or something like that. And some of them have a talent for leading others or for setting direction and so forth, and get promoted into managers. But they came out of some kind of specialization. Some of them kind of have a strong heart there still, which is fine. But thinking organizationally, how do you make an organization to work? It's so easy to think, this is where we are now, this is what we be, and let's go do. No, that's a very complicated process of motivation, of process design, and so forth. So we use the STAR model kind of to educate our managers to think, how do you develop an organization, and not just describe where you want it to be.
okay. Okay, we're going to move on in the questions here. And as a global company, you're in 180 countries, and so you're working in multiple international markets. So we have actually several questions regarding this.
Okay.
And that is, so how do you work with the different national cultures when trying to reach specific organizational capacity?
In terms of managing diversity internally, you think? Or
And yes, and how does it impact what you do in the company? How are you able to actually work with the diverse, you have the teams, both that have to follow the organizational mandate, if you will, from country to country, but also when you're working with teams that have multinationals.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of a two-part
yes,
question.
we try to do it on many, many dimensions, of course. One is to make sure that we need to have, in all the decision fora, the committees and boards, we call them, we need to have adequate representation from geographies and functions. So when we make decisions in terms of what kind of product device are we going to develop, is this going to fly across the globe and so forth. So you need to make sure that all these decision fora have the right functional in terms of marketing, production, sales, R&D and so forth, representation, and also geography. All the major markets need to be involved. Then of course we do a lot in terms of, it's going to sound simple, but language training. You know, if we can't speak the same language, it's very difficult. So right now, when we launch something from corporate, everything I launch in terms of a new onboarding program has to be translated into 14 languages. We have 14 kind of approved internal languages. We would like it to be closer to one, and that should be English, because it's very difficult if everyone gets so especially in some of the areas in production, when you have factories in France working with China, Japan, and Brazil, how do they communicate? And this needs to be precise communication, for example. So we're doing some basic things around language training, making offers, ensuring that everyone can speak decent English, because that's going to help working across.
Can you see how that's affecting the organizational culture?
I'm not sure that is affecting our organizational culture. I think the strongest kind of driver or factor maintaining our culture is what I said, the management audit. And having been an auditor myself, it's a great feeling. You get to, I travel to a country, and this employee is kind of, oh, I'm so glad that someone from headquarters came all the way out here to ask me how I feel about everything. Most of the time you don't find a lot, but just the feeling that this process is in place to make sure that if we have some bad guys, the system will catch that and deal with it.
Okay, so we had a question about your opinion of utilizing Hofstetter's model.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to elaborate on that? How I mean, it's a similar model, one would say, going from IBM and doing this kind of going through across the boards, the different countries, and doing the work that Hofstetter did. And then you were talking about your CEO who actually did something kind of similar, but took it to the next level in terms of his own organization. So how would you compare utilizing Hofstetter or how your CEO or how your organization utilizes national culture?
I tend to find that we have more, when I work with leadership development, I tend to find there's more similarities than differences across cultures. Right. There's more things in common. I think, in the past we were kind of, when you have this Nordic Way, what is it? How can you kind of make it shorter? So we like to say, and this is going to sound a little fluffy, but a pharmaceutical company with a heart, right? That we have a care for our employees. We have what we call the triple bottom line, we have social responsibility and so forth. I think we do that in every country, but the scale isn't the same, right? So in some countries, we're always at that end of the scale. But in absolute terms, if you compare to, it's just like a political spectrum, right? It's also the same. Someone who's a left wing in this country would be a slightly right wing in another country.
So would you say communities of practice?
Yeah.
Like-minded?
Yes.
So that is going to bring us, do we have some more questions? We're going to be opening it up for the audience, and I'm looking to see if my colleagues have some questions for you as well. And I'm sorry? Uh-oh, yes. We have a technical issue here.
Okay.
Oh, there it is, okay. So how are the abilities among managers in conducting root cause analysis?
If you ask me, could be much better. And that's why we're trying to push all the time, of course, in our leadership training. We focus very much on increasing managers' ability to kind of understand people and organizational processes. The kind of business side of it, the technical side, they're very well covered. But so my answer would be, I, of course, from HR, would like them to be much better. I think on a great scale, we're pretty fine, but we're always pushing those things as content elements in our leadership training.
Would that assure increased participation?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Okay. You are measuring satisfaction, but would engagement be more interesting to measure?
I use these words interchangeably. We're measuring engagement, and absolutely, we're doing that all the time. And actually, it's kind of an interesting thing that you have these different categories depending on what kind of model you use. That you have people who are actively disengaged. You don't want too many of them. You have someone who's disengaged. You're engaged, and then those who are kind of over-engaged, which then turn into stress and something like that. So we're very concerned about. We want high engagement, but it can't kind of spill over where people can't sleep because they're worrying about their job all the time. And we have seen some change, some elements of that which we're very, very monitoring very carefully to make sure that's not going to kind of develop out of control.
Okay, so to bring the students in a little bit more, I had a question that in my big pile of questions got mixed up, but I'm rethinking it now, and that is, as an engineer, how would you go about looking into a career at Novo Nordisk? What would be the kind of quick tips?
First is getting the job, right? And then I can just go to our webpage, which is all the time updated with vacant jobs, and we have hundreds in Denmark right now as we speak. Of course, the other thing I would say, if you're mobile, that you don't have to live in downtown Copenhagen, that's a huge advantage. So we're definitely looking for people who are both within this huge country of Denmark and also globally are mobile. But in terms of career advice going forward, I'm in head of talent development. I get asked this question a lot internally. How do I get ahead? And I always say there's a very simple way. I stole it from someone, of course. Be a Lego brick. A Lego brick is kind of a brick has two features. It has a distinct shape, which means you have to have a profession or a knowledge or some kind of contribution which is strong and unique. Your professionalism. And then it can be built together with other pieces into a bigger piece, which means you must be able to cooperate very well across functions and geographies. So I always say to people, do very well in your job and make sure you're a team player. Opportunities will come your way. Don't be too much, oh, when is my turn and all of that. That's actually not going to help you. We are more worried about promoting the ones who want it too badly, because their motivation is probably they want it for the wrong reason. We'd rather promote the one who's just a natural leader and a team player, who's always engaged in finding the bigger solution and not just covering their own little turf.
Okay. Have you guys come up with some more questions, or any questions? We're going to get a mic down here.
Okay, so you said that you promote 700 employees.
Managers. Yeah.
Managers, yeah. In the bottom level of the organization, do you move around the managers in the different departments, promoting them, or how do you manage that?
Yes, we do that. It's kind of, we're doing a lot to rotate people. Of course, we're also, we're actually, in a big organization like us, who's a very ambitious organization, you need to be very careful what you encourage, because you're going to get it. So we encourage this mobility, which actually meant that people started moving around too fast. So it meant that you have managers who were, all of them had never been in a position more than a year and a half, then they were looking for the next. So you had discontinuity. And when you then come out and talk to the employees, they say, oh, I really hate my manager, but he's going to be gone in 2 years anyway, so I'll just wait for it, kind of. So we're kind of trying to find the right balance here. Of course, we want people to move around, but we need continuity, because a lot of the things we work with, you require deep scientific knowledge. So you can't just fly in with a helicopter and start managing things. But mobility, and especially what we call global mobility, that you're interested in having a career, and we have sales and manufacturing and R&D facilities all over the world. So if you're interested in that, then you're very valuable for a company like us.
Okay, I'm thinking, just, do we have some more questions? I'm going to give you one while we're waiting for him.
Mm-hmm.
It was in terms of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So as an engineer and coming up with the cutting edge things,
Yes.
I mean, it's with the healthcare trend boom for what can be happening with the technology. What would you suggest that these students keep their eye on? What's moving fast? Give us a little. What gives them the edge?
It's hard to say, actually, because innovation in the pharma industry is somewhat a little bit different than innovation in other industries. Mm-hmm. If you're in something like this, right, we can get a creative bunch of people together and come up with a idea. When we do pharmaceutical research, is kind of basic research. You just have to figure out which molecule is going to work. And there's not a lot of, that's just hard trial and error, and you do that for years. Then you have clinical trials where you start injecting the product into first laboratory rats and then into humans as you so a lot of it is just following protocol. Okay. And out of that comes a new product, but it's kind of discipline over 10 years in a lot of. But of course we have devices, injection devices, and there we're definitely looking for innovation and creative ways. So innovation is a little bit a different thing in the pharma industry, but it's extremely important for us, also in terms of new ways, channels of selling our product, and new ways of marketing and so forth.
Okay, please.
Yeah, hello. In one of your last slides about this wind's high energy leader, then you had one of the downfalls would be that he would take too many initiatives. Yeah. And I was just wondering what exactly you mean by it, because of course if he makes unwanted initiatives that the company doesn't need, that's clear that we don't need that. But do you think it's a disadvantage if only the leader brings initiatives? So do you see it as a strength that many people in the team come up, or what did you mean exactly with that?
Okay. First of all, huge strength if a lot of employees come with initiatives. I've been a manager myself for 10 years, and you just love it when people have ideas and initiatives, so you don't have to come up with things yourself. But if, as a manager, you need to be very careful with that you're setting direction, right? So if you initiate a new project, a lot of the employees get confused, and things take some time to trickle down the system. So especially if you're a country manager, you need to be very careful that what you initiate, you follow through on, and don't just next month, there's another flavor of the month. So that's more for a senior manager. You need to be careful, don't to start too many things. You're confusing employees around what's the priorities here. And you always run into priority problems, right? There's never enough time and resources. And if you are, as a manager, can help create clear direction, simple direction, that's of course a benefit.
Søren has a question.
I would like to tease you a little bit, Bort, because isn't it a bit narrow just to look at yourself as a pharmaceutical company? It's so last year. And how about the customer services? Shouldn't you look into some experience economy?
Yes, yes. First of all, I am at the conservative end of our own company, right? So,
I know.
So there would be other people who will respond. But as far as I understand, there's a lot, there's so many regulations around what you can do. We can't just say, oh, actually, when you want to inject your, you can have your phone as an injection device. No. It has to be approved by God knows who. So it's very difficult to kind of just throw something on the market in an industry like us. But yes, I think that's a challenge we're facing as a company, that we are historically highly science-driven, right? So we have a huge belief if the actual insulin we produce is the best one, it's gonna win. So you will have a lot of people agreeing with you in our company, saying we're probably a little conservative in terms of user economy and thinking. We're just thinking we need to convince the doctors through scientific evidence. Then we're gonna win the battle, which is mostly right, but not solely right so far. That's true.
Yes. Okay. It's a bit difficult to get this question in the right way, but we read about goal setting. It's very important that you have a clear goal.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that developing a pharmaceutical is a long process, and you just have to develop the right molecule.
Yeah.
So how do you set clear goals in this field?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and we have an annual cycle. So every year, before March 1st, you have to define in a system. These are your business targets and whatever. And it has to be a mid-year review before August 1st, and then there's a year-end review, and you get a grade 1 to 5. If you get 5, you get outstanding, and you get a bonus and all of this. So target setting is important. Of course, if you're working on an R&D project, which is going to stretch out for 4 years, how are you going to make a meaningful target for this year? And if I can be very frank, we see a lot of stupid target setting, and it's driving short-term behaviors many places where you just want to make your target, even though it's a nonsense target. So I think the overall process of having target setting and follow-up is the right one, but we are struggling, and every year trying to fine-tune how do we do this in a smart way. And it's always a temptation when you come from corporate, as I do, that it's better if you have one system, but we have I don't know how many realities. So is this system one size fits all? It actually fits no one. And that's I wouldn't say we have found the formula. We're struggling with exactly the problem you're facing there. And how do we kind of, and all of this performance management is very kind of driven from sales organization, and then becomes a formula for good management in all kind of other functions also.
Bort, I read in the newspapers that you got into problems on the American market. You had a new product which actually had to be sold to the Americans. You expected it would go through the FDA.
Yes.
And it didn't go through. What consequences does it? Of course, it has some economic consequences, but what are the organizational consequences of that?
Huge. Yeah, we had a product which was going to drive a lot of our growth in the US market, and we were very certain this was going to be approved by the US authorities, so certain. This was in January last year. That in the fall, the year before, we hired 700 new sales representatives in the US, just having them ready. You're going to fly out on January 1st. And then it didn't get approved. So suddenly you have 700 sales reps, which you maybe actually wouldn't have hired otherwise. 200 of them maybe. So first of all, we are Novo Nordisk. We just don't throw out people. So we put them on our current portfolio. So they will have a job and work. But that's a little setback. The other thing is that the FDA then said, you now need to do more clinical trials to prove the efficacy of this product. So now we need 400 people in trial management across the globe. So you have 700 here you didn't really need, and now you need 400 here, right that. And actually, the production capacity, and in pharma production is extremely specific. So if you have a factory approved for one product, you cannot just produce something else. So we have invested, I don't want to mention the number of money, in production capacity, and that's just going to sit there now for 2-3 years. So it's a huge problem in terms of having to readjust. You need suddenly other competencies, you need to have other priorities. So that was a big setback for us. We're still struggling to get that one right, or come back from it, so to speak.
Sam? We have.
You mentioned that you can't just stick a needle in someone, of course.
Sorry,
that you can't just stick a needle in someone. So I was just wondering, how do you handle the ethical problems with your business? Is that part of the managerial education?
Yes. Actually, that's a big concern for us, business ethics in all kinds of shades. And you know, in a social media world, you are very exposed if you have something doing. And it's very, very tricky. You know, if you have a pharmaceutical product, it is approved by the authorities for this kind of use. So you can only market it for that kind of use. The doctors, however, can use it for something else. They're allowed. So here's a little example for you. We have one of our diabetes drugs is making you lose weight, which is very attractive for a lot of people without complications, right? So it's approved for diabetes, but it actually can also work to reduce weight. We cannot market it for that, and of course we don't, but doctors are allowed to use it for that. And we had a nightmare story some years, 2 years ago, was this women's magazine in Brazil, and you see this young lady in a bikini and say, I'm using this, and our product is on the front page, and she's saying, just inject yourself with this and you're all ready for bikini season in no time. And it's not approved for that, right? So business ethics, we're training people, and that's a sure reason to get dismissed from our company if you violate any kind of business ethics. Either it's in the research, how we do trials, it's in the promotion of the product, it's in production, anywhere. That's something you learn very fast as a new employee, that you need to go the very clear line, which is defined there.
All right. Why don't you get it approved for weight loss purposes?
We are in the process.
Okay.
Yes. It's we can see that opportunity. Yeah. But again, to your question with ethical, right? There's diabetes even though diabetes 2 is a lifestyle disease, we think we're dealing with chronic diseases. You cannot get rid of it. So we like to think of ourselves as a serious pharma company who is helping people who have chronic disease. Obesity, overweight, is that a chronic disease, or is it just nice to do? Is this a whole ethical thing that we're moving into something completely different? Yeah. And we're struggling with that kind of, what is this going to do to our reputation if we go in there? Are we just kind of chasing the dough, or what are we doing? I'm not claiming I have the answer, but that's some of the debates you run into, right? That you kind of stumble into a product which takes you into a total different therapy area, which you may have no experiences with, and which may not actually fit with who you're trying to be as a company.
Well, that brings me to that you have, over the last 20, 30 years, we've established lifestyle diseases that would not have been, they are chronic diseases now. Yeah. So it could be that there is a evaluation. So the challenge is for your company, is it a new organizational leg that you need to have in your company to consider these new opportunities, these new, what are the chronic diseases of the 21st century, and where will they be in 10 years?
And you're pointing exactly to some of the debates we're having, right? Where is the market side of it? How do we deal with it organizationally? Can this kind of be a leg of diabetes, or is it a total new thing? We're still kind of undecided on a lot of those things, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so for something completely different. When you do auditing, or did auditing, how do you avoid being scrutinizing, and how do you instead be protective of the affiliate?
Yeah, first of all, it's a judgment call, right? The first priority is to protect the employees, right? So there's always a confidential, and which means that if you're the only one who brings up a problem, I can't write it in my report. But of course, if you bring up something, I will ask some questions around and see, is this a trend, or is it just you who are upset, kind of? And of course, you're trying to help the manager saying, so a lot of the problems we find is unclear strategy. And then the manager will say, oh Christ, I've done this 10 years, you know, here's the proof. Say, yes, we sympathize with you. You still have the problem that your employees don't know where you're going. So we're not here to make a problem for you. We're just telling you, you'd probably like to know the state of affairs in terms of engagement, clarity, or whatever. So most of the time, that's doable. They understand, yes, we're trying to help you. But of course, sometimes they get a finding which is very severe, and then there's slight pushback, I would say.
Okay, we're going to be wrapping it up. So, Søren, didn't you have a question?
I just have one last one.
Are you going to tease me again?
Yes,
now?
perhaps,
Okay.
perhaps not. But I think some of your case stories are actually, I think they actually fits quite well into one of the key trends within, if you look into corporate strategy, that flexibility is actually more important than efficiency, because it's such a complex world. So you can't really, you can't really make a scope of 3, 5, or 7 years. So you have to be extremely flexible. I think you actually support that by, as if you look into the stories from the US and so forth.
Yeah, and you know, the way we're in your terms, I would say we're thinking very much what are our core capabilities. So you kind of distinguish between what are our products and markets we operate, and what are the things we do well. So that's why we are thinking about obesity, because that's so related to diabetes. But we have 5,000 people in R&D, so every now and then they stumble on something which looks promising. So they stumble on something that looks promising in cancer. But we're not a cancer research company. How can we start moving into that at all? No, that's not anywhere within our core capabilities, but obesity is. So in that respect, I think, we're trying to, whatever flexibility we can have, but thinking in terms of it as core capabilities, as organizational capabilities, and how can then they be utilized in a business sense.
Okay. Well, let's give Bård a round of applause and thank him for being here. It was great. We're going to take 5 minutes break, and then we're going to come back and go into the wrap up and the kind of put it into perspective of how you can apply what we talked about just now into this afternoon and to prepare for the exams coming up. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much.